what I see right now, though, is that pool of prospects is really diminishing because the number of kids learning to ride bikes has fallen off dramatically. The decline in the United States has been 250,000 kids per year fewer ride bikes year after year.
Wow.
I mean, you think about all the kids in the United States.
Welcome to Power Hour, where the editors of Power Sports Business interview the movers and shakers of the industry. This episode is brought to you by Synchrony. Hi, everybody. It's Brendan Baker with Power Sports Business and Power Hour. We're here today with Ryan McFarland, who is the CEO and founder of Strider Bikes and also the founder of the nonprofit organization All Kids Bike. And today we're really talking about All Kids Bike. I think everybody knows what a Strider bike is, but we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But, Ryan's been pretty instrumental in getting kids to learn how to ride. And, so Ryan, thank you for coming on and give us a little background about how you got involved with how you started this whole thing.
You bet. Well, thanks for having me on. Always love talking about this, and it's kind of a topic everybody needs to be talking about is how we get more kids on bikes, because kids on bikes is where it all starts. Get ultimately more riders on motorcycles someday. So
yeah, I mean that's the goal.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a little bit of background on me. When I was a little kid, my dad was a Yamaha dealer. This was back in the, early 70s when he had the dealership. I was just a little kid. So, I started on motorcycles early on, from riding around on the gas tank with him to my first bike was a little Yamaha TY80, the little trials bike, because that was the smallest
Okay,
thing
the
he could get.
TY80, that's the smallest one. Okay.
Yeah, back in the day, he even had
Did,
to put a
did that
lowering
have a
kit on
seat?
it so that I could fit on it. Yeah, it's the little trials bike that they made back in the day. This was all pre-PW days. So,
Right.
um, but just have been around motorcycles and motorsports really my whole life. Got into mountain biking when that really was taking off, especially once the mountain bikes started getting into suspension and everything. Started feeling a bit more like a dirt bike, essentially. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, these are getting more and more exciting as the technology develops on them. So, but I've been an enthusiast of riding bicycles, motorcycles, mountain bikes, motorcycles, whether it's, I've got a Beta 252 stroke and a Yamaha T7 and a Tiger 900 and
Oh yeah, you've
too
got the
many
whole
bikes to
collection.
name. I love them all. I
And
always, my wife laughs at me because I go for a ride and I come back in. I'm like, oh my gosh, that is the best motorcycle ever. I think I should sell all my others and just ride this. And then I go
right.
ride a different one and I come back in and tell my wife, oh man, that was the best. That's the best motorcycle. I should just sell all the others and only ride this one. And she hears it on every motorcycle I have, every motorcycle I ride, and she's just going, "Oh, this
Yeah.
guy."
That is the hard part is like it's hard to just narrow it down. But now, so
Yeah.
we were talking earlier, like you started, because you started so young, you kind of started riding bicycles and motorcycles almost the same time. You don't even
Yeah.
know which one came first.
Yeah, I really don't. They probably were about the same time. That would have been in the early 70s. I was born in 68, so early 70s. And there just wasn't a lot of selection. Most kids' bikes even were 20-inch wheel bikes. So until you grew big enough, it
Yeah.
just wasn't really even an option for you. And motorcycles, they were just really starting. Dirt bikes for kids were just starting in those years. And there
So did
again, they
you
were
skip
all
the
fairly
BMX
big.
era? Did you skip BMX and just go straight to dirt bikes or what?
Yeah, I actually my first bicycle, well, maybe my second one, but it was the Yamaha motobike. So I
Oh,
rode the Yamaha motobike. So those are collector's items now. I wish I still had them. I had two of those that I rode at the time, and I look back on that thinking, I don't even know how I did it. Those things weighed like 40 pounds with,
Right.
Full suspension is an awesome bike,
But
but
they look cool as heck. I remember a kid in my neighborhood had one, and I mean, it was super cool. I wrecked it. I believe I wrecked it, looking down at something, and I looked up and there was a parked car right in front of me. I was
oh
like, oh,
no.
crap.
Well, they were just total tanks, indestructible, but
Yeah.
they weighed as much as a tank too. So, I think I ended up pushing it up an awful lot of the hills, but man, you could bomb down the hills and you could go
Oh,
over
yeah.
jumps and drop offs and
But you
full
looked cool
full
doing it too.
suspension.
That
Yep.
was the thing.
Yeah.
A bike as a kid, I remember, I mean, we were where I grew up, BMX was just kind of coming into play. I had the old Stingray bike that I turned into a BMXer, and that wasn't, it was like okay for a minute, but then all the kids started getting real BMX bikes, and I was like,
Yeah.
I got to get one of those.
Yeah.
I got to keep up. And then they would get even better bikes, and I'm still with mine, going, okay. So, my brother and I we each got to pick out our own dirt bike at one point. And he got something like I think he got a Diamondback, and I had a bike called a Panda, which was the worst bike ever. The Panda was way too big. I was a little guy, and the thing was so long. I mean, I was like fully stretched out trying to hold on to this thing,
Yeah.
but I thought
Yeah.
it looked cool.
Yep.
The wheels looked good. I had those mag wheels, but
Oh
we were talking
yes.
earlier, like the bike, learning how to ride a bike, whether it was a bicycle or a motorcycle, but I think especially as a kid, learning how to ride a bicycle was a big, point in your life. It kind of built that confidence that you could be on your own. You could do something without your parents,
Great.
pushing you along or doing anything. It's like, hey, I'm independent now. I got a
Yeah.
bike.
Yeah. And I think so. It definitely was a milestone for all of us, and I think it still is for kids. I don't think that they sometimes realize what they're missing out if they don't get motivated down that path in some way.
Yeah.
Um, we kind of, in spite of all those bikes that were so poorly built and way too heavy and sized wrong and everything, we just kind of soldiered through it all, primarily because we didn't have too many other good options. It was like, well, this
Yeah.
is what I
Well, yeah,
got.
it was
I'm
like,
going to
well, this
make
is
the
how it
best of
is.
it.
Nothing had advanced really. No one was,
Right.
I mean,
And we didn't have really any other options for connecting with our friends or getting
oh,
places. And so, like, we needed this to work. So we're going to figure it out one way or another. We needed this to work. And I think what has slowly happened, well, to back up, so most of us learned how to ride. And once you know how to ride a bike, you have the fundamental skills that can carry over to motorcycling.
right.
You look at Motorcycle Safety Foundation, and the first bullet point on prerequisites to be able to take their basic rider course is must be able to balance and ride a bicycle. Like that's the qualifier. And and so we basically all learned to ride. So we were basically all potential motorcyclists. Like
Correct. Yeah.
the motorcycle industry had a lot of prospects that could easily transition into that. What I see right now, though, is that pool of prospects is really diminishing because the number of kids learning to ride bikes has fallen off dramatically. The decline in the United States has been 250,000 kids per year fewer ride bikes year after year. I
Wow.
mean, you think about all the kids in the United States and the number of them who ride bikes, and that number is decreasing by a
Right.
250,000 per year every year and has been for almost 2 decades.
That's a
And
that's a big, big number.
it's a huge number, and it's almost like it hasn't been understood because I think motorcycling, in large part, the motorcycling industry and the enthusiasts have just taken for granted that that first step, learning to ride a bike, would happen.
Right.
And so all of our efforts are like further up the ladder. We're just assuming that everybody has gotten onto the ladder and they've started to climb, and then at some point they're going to hit motorcycling and we'll take it from there. And the reality is people have quit getting onto that ladder at the very
Yeah.
bottom of learning how to ride a bike. And and that it's happened years and years ago, and it's just now really starting to be felt, I think, by the bicycle industry and the motorcycle industry, who are very much focused on adult riders
Right.
that have just naturally had this feeder of kids aging up into their sports.
It's
And
interesting because we talk about people aging out, but we don't talk enough about the kids aging up, and how to
right,
get that, like you said, we used to be able to replenish a lot of that ridership or add on to it because they were coming up through bicycle, they
yeah,
started to learn to ride. They might have got a little BMX bike or
yeah,
a road bike or something, and that kind of gave them that confidence to then move into a motorcycle.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
we're
So
just
this
not
is
seeing that.
some interesting statistics that kind of point to this. You talked about BMX, and that kind of started in the 70s, basically.
Yeah.
And on any Sunday, Malcolm
Oh yeah.
Smith in the movie. So Malcolm Smith, I'm going to
Yeah.
show you
Let's. Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
just sits in my office here. For the people that can see this, this was
Oh
a
man,
Strider from back in 2010, and it's
that is
autographed by
awesome.
Malcolm Smith here.
That is
He was
so
the
awesome. Yeah, you should get that
grand
one like on the
marshal at
wall.
Vintage Motorcycle Days that year, and we had a Strider riding area for the kids at the event. But
I know he did.
uh,
They his dealership's done quite a few like learn to ride events and things that,
yes,
yeah.
yes, they have been a good supporter of all kids bike and putting learn to ride programs into elementary schools out there. Kind of get into that, but
So let's
that
to pivot a little bit, talk about how well, first there was that big moment of like you need to get a bike, right? You built Strider, right? How did that,
yeah,
what, in a brief, like, was there just something like I got to get kid, or you had
yeah,
a kid and you want to get them to ride? How does it come about? Like, I'm going to build a bike with no pedals.
yeah, yep. I was I had been away from dirt biking for a while, kind of in my 30s, trying to do adult things and get, my business off the ground and all that. And I had been racing cars and doing some other stuff and kind of just got burnt out on it all. And it just settled into work, and it was just eating at me. So a buddy and I said, we really need to get some dirt bikes. I got the itch again to just have something we can go have fun on, and nothing like a dirt bike. And so we bought a couple dirt bikes, and I mean, I just fell in love with it. It was like my whole childhood just flowing
Oh yeah.
back in, and I was on fire for riding again. And that was about the same time that my wife and I had our first son. And so all this, like, reinvigorated passion for writing was coming at me about the same time I had a little boy. And so I was just super excited to share it with him. I mean, he learned all of his colors by, you know, Kawasaki green, Honda red,
Oh
Yamaha
yeah.
blue. I mean, he
He
associated
knew them
all
all.
those, all of his numbers. He knew Chad Reed was on 22 on the blue Yamaha.
That's
And like,
awesome.
at 2 years old, we'd watch Supercross, and he knew all the riders' names and numbers and colors and brands and everything. And so we were just way into it. I was super excited to get him riding. And so, I mean, I bought about every traditional thing you could buy. We had four-wheeled scoot toys and tricycles and little bikes with training wheels. And I had a Yamaha 50 with training wheels. I mean, I was like all
You were,
in on this. Like,
yeah.
I mean, $2,000 worth of stuff purchased to
And to
get
be
him
like, I don't
riding. I
want to
was so
ride.
excited. My wife's like, slow down,
Yeah. Oh
you're a
gosh.
freak. And but
But that's a
but
natural thing. I think a dad,
yeah,
you enjoyed it so much, you want to have your kid and
absolutely.
get that
Yeah,
same kind of joy out of things that
yeah,
you enjoyed, and
yeah. So I kind of say, it's a good thing that I went that far because I went down the traditional road of all these three-wheeled and four-wheeled and training wheel equipped machines that I actually got to the dead end. I kind of like was so far in, I realized this stuff isn't
You
working.
went way into
It,
that rabbit
I
hole.
I went way in and hit bottom. And I really was taking a hard look at this stuff, thinking it's all too heavy for him. It's all too big. It's too complicated. And my wife's wisely kind of saying, you need to wait a year or two for him to be able to do this stuff. And I'm like, well, I don't want to wait a year or two. There's got to be an alternative. And that's really what led to Strider. I mean, I just took a hard look at at my son's size and weight and ability in that at that moment in time and realize, okay, my gosh, he's a 20-pound little kid with a 12-inch inseam.
Right.
And I've
Yeah.
got stuff here that weighs, I mean, the tricycle's 15 pounds, the pedal bike with training wheels, the little tiny thing looks tiny to me. But if I actually weigh it, it's 18 pounds. It weighs almost as much as he does. And if I look at the seat, it comes up to his chest.
Right.
But there again, from my adult perspective, it looks tiny. So, he should be able to do this. But when I took a hard look, you realize how poorly fit all this stuff is. So you either wait for him to grow up and grow into it to the proportion for the proportions to get right, or you figure out how do I get the proportions right now. And when you look at that, it's like, holy cow, this is going to be a radical um, project then, because I got to gut 2/3 of the weight out of this thing and cut it down to
Oh,
like,
yeah.
50% of its seat height and everything else. But I mean, that's ultimately what I did to get to the original Strider bike. I mean, I started cutting tubes out and taking parts off and trying to shorten everything, make it as small and as light as possible so that the weight ratio would be right relative to him and the size would be right relative to his
When did
inseam.
you decide like I got to take the pedals and everything off and the chain,
Yeah.
like was that a something like you were like, I should, was that an early on thing or was that like,
No,
maybe it's too complicated to,
right. Well, we had some Scoot toys. So, I mean, I was aware of him running around on the Scoot toys, and saw that function, but I was still trying to just get the bike shrunk. But what I ran into there, and this was kind of a mental hurdle, I call it a hurdle, but really it was a breakthrough in that when I really started looking at the chain and the sprocket and the crank lengths and thinking, holy cow, for me to actually scale this small enough, like it won't even be functional anymore. I mean, the
right? The
cranks would
cranks
have
would
to
be
be
like
like,
be a little
yeah,
tiny.
an inch and a half long.
Right.
And but that's the reality of it. So it kind of finally you just ran into this fatal flaw of even trying to propel the bike in this way. But I had to get over this hurdle because I was like, well, shoot, if I take the pedals off it, is it even going to be a bike anymore? But what happened when I finally was like, it just doesn't work. I just need to get rid of it. And if I get rid of it, it's like pounds come off the bike because that's like the heaviest metal on the whole bike, the crank arms and the bottom bracket and the sprocket,
Oh yeah.
the
Yep.
cog and the chain ring and everything. Like that's a major chunk of weight. So that really was a breakthrough because it let the seat come down lower. It simplified the operation of it. He didn't have to think about that at all. But kind of the mental breakthrough for me was it got to the essence of what riding is. Riding doesn't have anything to do with pedals or gasoline or electricity or anything else. It is being upright on two wheels and counter steering and steering to create and control leans that take you through turns.
Right.
And
Huh.
and that's like the DNA that is shared from a Strider bike all the way to a MotoGP bike to a Supercross bike, whatever it is, to a Tour de France road racing bicycle. Like they all have that at their essence. And the proof is, I mean, I was just in Colombia riding dual sports a couple weeks ago, and some of the mountains over there, we were on these Honda 300 rallies, and we'd be at the scenic point at the top, taking some photos, and then like we wouldn't even start the motors. We would just push them, get
Oh, yeah.
going, and we would like coast, like ripping down these roads on the brakes because we're getting so much speed for literally like 5 miles before
Oh,
we even turn the motor
you're so
on. It
high
was
in the mountains, right? You don't, what do you need? You need brakes. You don't need motor,
yeah,
you know?
but it points out like twisting the throttle, pedaling the bike, striding the, the balance bike. Those are just means of making them move. It's a means of propulsion. Now
Right,
each one is fun in its own right, but the essence of riding that is shared through all of them is that ability to have the bike in motion and control the lean of and steering, that steering and counter steering. Like that's the essence of it all. So when I kind of embraced that, it was like, oh, absolutely. Now this is the ideal propulsion for a 2-year old. Feet on the ground, Fred Flintstoning the thing along. They don't
yeah.
have to think about that. They can just be concentrating on how to build their bike handling skills. And then later on, we'll introduce some pedals as a way to make the bike move and a throttle as a way to make the bike move. And, you
You
know,
know, it's interesting because I learned how to ride a bike similar to what a strider bike, a balance bike would have been. I had a little tiny bike that my dad, I don't know, I got, but it had hard wheel. It didn't even have pneumatic tires, hard tires, and he had training wheels on it. And for some reason, I decided to take the training wheels off. I was very mechanical as a
yeah,
kid. I would just tear things apart and not know how to put them back together. But anyway, pulled the training wheels off, and I'm up the street with my buddy who, lived at the end of the block. I'm like 5 years old, and we were walking. He's walking beside me, and we're talking. He's walking right beside me. I'm on the bike, and I'm not even pedaling. I'm walking the bike because he's walking beside
yeah,
me. Next thing you know, he's running. I'm like, why are you running? I'm like, oh, I'm pedaling. I'm riding this thing. I didn't even know I was riding it. And then I realized, oh, this is so natural. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I can ride a bike now,
that's
And
awesome.
it's like one of those things where, like, yeah, I mean, I think that having the pedals were kind of in the way when I tried to ride, as before with the training wheels. I could do it on the training. It was just trying to, balance everything.
Yeah,
It was a lot easier to just walk and
right.
when I'm walking it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm balancing this thing and I
Yep,
can ride it now.
yep, yep. Yeah, I mean, you really just want to start off at day one on 2 wheels so that you don't learn the bad habits. Because basically, if you have 3 or 4 wheels, the steering is backwards.
Right.
You don't turn by initiating a lean to the inside, you lean to the outside. I mean, that's the fundamental difference between cars and motorcycles right there,
Yeah.
or trikes or anything. Is a motorcycle, you don't feel a centrifugal force in a turn because you lean to
You counter
counteract
it.
it.
Yeah, you're
So it's always
counteracting it.
neutral. And on a trike or a car, you feel a force pushing you to the outside of the turn. And that's the same thing with tricycles and training wheels for kids. We're putting them on a vehicle that basically has them experiencing a force to the outside with no ability to lean it to the inside. So they're learning the wrong skill. And a lot of us just soldier through that. When we finally get put on 2 wheels, we essentially we start over right there because nothing with 3 wheels or
Right.
4 wheels transfers. So
Yeah.
we're just starting over and we're learning from scratch right at that moment. What happens with a lot of kids that maybe are a little more timid, not real rambunctious, maybe they're thinking about it too much, is that if they've been on a tricycle or training wheels, they have learned that this centrifugal force to the outside of the turn is that's what they've been learning. So they don't know how to make the transition to a different method. So they go down a
That makes a
sidewalk
lot of sense.
and they think, okay, I'm going to go to the left. I want to turn to the left. Well, what happens? That bike throws them down to the ground on the right. And when they were expecting something was going to hold them up there, so then they go back, oh my gosh, I want the training wheels back on, and they practice harder and take them off, and it does the same thing again. It's like training wheels are the worst idea ever invented. They actually, they
Yeah, they
teach us
counter
the
they're
wrong, it's,
counterintuitive to what you need to do,
yeah,
and
it's the wrong skill. Yeah,
that is strange because well, in the going back to some of my experience with, I taught some uh kids that my mom's friends kids were like, they were older, like maybe 10 or 11, they were older kid and they still didn't know how to ride a bike. And my mom's like, well, you're a good bike rider, why don't you teach them? I'm like, I'm like, well, so I thought about it, and it was difficult. I mean, I had to break down, like, how do I ride a bike? Because once
yeah,
you learn to ride, you don't think about how am I
right,
doing this? It's just you're doing it. You know what I
right.
mean? You're not
Yeah.
really all those skill. It's already innate and built into your brain and how you react to things. So I had to break it down a lot more. And I think that the problem they had, they were very timid. They were
Yeah,
afraid of, crashing. They were
right.
afraid of doing something wrong. And just no confidence for
Yeah.
one. And they had training wheels on for way too long, like they
And
didn't.
yeah, and that
So
whole combination is bad because that same personality like associates all of their security with the training wheels then. Like that's
yeah,
what's protecting them and saving them right there. And it's actually the thing that's holding them back. So,
yeah.
it's just easier if you start out right from day one, especially kids so young. We're starting kids at a year and a half, 2 years old,
Wow.
and they're on two wheels right from the start. They never know anything different. Their ability on a bike, and it will carry over into motorcycles. I've already seen it with my own kids and many, many other kids. They are so natural on the bike now because they have been experiencing and controlling this machine in this manner, whether it had a motor or not, back in the day, but they have been controlling a lean of a two-wheeled machine since they were tiny. I mean, their brain
Right.
has actually developed, neural pathways to do exactly this.
Absolutely.
It's like Tiger Woods in a golf club,
Yeah.
when you start that young, you can make it
It's like
to
learning a
levels of
language,
expertise that
learning
others
how
will
to
never
dance, all
reach.
those stuff. Little kids learn languages where their brain is a sponge,
Yep.
so
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yep.
mean, it's just incredible. And I'm sure a lot of these supercross guys have come out of learning how to ride on a strider bike,
Yep. Yep.
and through some of these programs that you've done. So tell me a little
It was
about
real.
All Kids Bike, how that got started.
Yeah, a good little segue here with the point you just talked about. Ryan Dungey Foundation has been a big supporter of All Kids Bike here. Ryan Dungey also works with the KTM juniors at the Supercross races. And I was at one of the Supercross events. We were at the KTM trailer where all the junior kids were, and they were doing their pit meeting and everything. And I had a chance to talk to them and just asked them, how many knew what a strider was. And every single hand went up. How many of you had striders? Every single hand went up, like that is the future right there, is getting these
Yeah.
kids started young. I mean, there will be we're right on the cusp of this where really every champion's going to say, yeah, I started riding when I was two, on a strider bike or a balance bike, maybe some other competitor of ours. But I mean, this is a category and a process and a paradigm shift that we really set in motion, 18 years ago now. And with Strider, I think we've sold we're approaching 5 million bikes
Wow.
worldwide now. And
Holy
you
cow.
think about all those bikes that have been handed down to siblings and, and neighbor kids and everything. I think there's probably been a solid 15 million kids that have learned to ride on Strider bikes. And
Oh
so
man, yeah.
it's been a fun, big impact.
Did you
Um,
ever think that this would be like, take off like this when you were first starting out? Was that, I
no,
mean, maybe
I
that was
mean,
what you dreamt of, but was
yeah,
this,
well, I kind of joke because there's all this about doing all your due diligence and research and everything and building out your business plan and all that. I didn't really do any of that.
you're like,
Here's what my research amounted to. I
yeah.
looked up the birth rate in the United States and it was like almost 4 million kids per year. And I was like,
You're like,
well,
that's a good
that's
market.
enough. That's enough data for me. I think I can safely proceed. That was the end of it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
um, but how we got into all kids bike, uh, after a while, Strider kind of got a reputation of being, an expert in helping kids learn how to ride. And so then we started getting more and more calls from parents with older kids and grandparents, were struggling with grandkids that didn't know how to ride and they're like 8 years old, 9 years old. And, I just, I kind of sad to say here, I just didn't pay that much attention to it at first. I'd give them a couple pointers over the phone, say, we don't make anything for your kids. You could try this, and
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
luck type of thing. And then we started getting calls from parents that had kids with special needs, and so that
Yeah.
started slowing me down a little bit and really trying to understand what they were up against, what they were facing and the struggles because they're really working hard at it. But there came a point where it's like, man, you're getting so many of these calls that it kind of rocked me a little bit. And that's when I started digging in and really looking at some of the numbers of ridership and just it startled me, because riding bikes and motorcycles have been such a part of my life always.
Right.
Um, I couldn't imagine a life without them. And yet here I'm digging into these statistics and realizing that we're at a point where the majority of kids in the United States, and I'm 6 to 18, 17 years old, the kind of legal definition of a kid in there of that age, and the majority of them are not learning how to ride a bike anymore.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
that
just,
blew
yeah.
me away. And currently it's like only 1 in 4 kids will even ride a bike this year.
Yeah. That's
So,
crazy.
and
Considering like our childhoods, we're same age probably. I know we are because you were born same year as I was. That it was, you just took it for granted, or
right,
just like, yeah, everybody rode a bike,
yeah,
that's how you, that was your
this
social
statistic
network.
was like this was riding a bike one time in a calendar year. Only 25% of kids are that. I'm thinking, oh my gosh,
Oh,
I rode my bike every single day,
oh,
not just
yeah,
once
yeah,
a year. So it really was startling, and I looked at these numbers of ridership decline and 250,000 kids, fewer kids riding bikes every year. I think the National Household Travel Survey done by the government said the number of kids using a bike for transportation's dropped by 50% in the last 10 years. Just crazy statistics that kind of rocked my world. And, we had been doing some stuff with benevolence. Earlier on, I had kind of committed 1% of top line revenue from Strider. We're just going to set that aside and do charitable work with it, trying to get kids engaged in riding and
yeah.
outside playing and everything. And feeling pretty good about that. And then I'm looking at these statistics thinking, holy crap, that's not even making a dent. We're losing 250,000 kids a year. Us sending some money to some YMCA groups and stuff here and there. It's a nice little feel good deal, but this is a sinking ship. We're not bailing it fast enough to get out. And so I really got to this point of like, what would it take? Like that's a massive number of decline. What would you have to do to turn that around? And so sometimes to solve a problem, you got to like figure out how to state it first. So I kind of boiled it down to, well, how do we reach the greatest number of kids in the shortest amount of time at the youngest age possible? Like
Yeah.
that's what we
Hey, that's not
need.
a big, hey, that's no problem. We should be able to
Yeah.
solve that.
But it was like once I got it framed that way, it's almost like it did start to come together because the answer was like, well, it has to be in the school systems. Like this
Yeah.
can't be some little optional program. It can't be a YMCA thing here and there, hit and miss. It
Right.
um it can't be like just some feel good efforts by some bike dealers and moto dealers here and there. It's like we won't ever win that. The rate of decline is so big. Like we need the nuclear option here. Uh,
Yeah.
and so it was like, okay, we've got to get into the school system and not with some after school recess program. This needs to be core curriculum. And okay, well, what's the youngest age? And it's kindergarten then. I mean, I'd love to get to kids earlier than that even, but there is
Yeah.
no good way to. Kindergarten is where structured education starts in America.
Right.
And
So
so
they're
that's what
about
we,
5 years old then at that
yep,
point,
five,
which,
6.
yeah.
And so we developed a program designed specifically for kindergarten PE that would train the teachers on how to teach it, would provide them all the equipment they need and the lesson plans and everything, turnkey, that would go into the school. And once it's placed in the school, then basically all of that equipment becomes the same as having desks and books and basketballs and everything else. It's like learning to ride now becomes a fundamental piece of education. And every kindergarten kid should graduate knowing how to ride a bike, just like they know their ABCs and their addition and subtraction. And if we go at the problem with that mindset and that intensity, I mean, like that fundamentally changes bicycling and motorcycling forever. Then now, you know, 100% of the population is a prospect.
Right. Oh yeah. I
So
mean, that's
it,
the
it
big thing
changes
is
everything.
like changes everything to get
Yeah,
more kids riding and out of their being on
yeah,
screen. What we were saying, like 7 hours a day, kids are on screen
yeah,
on average. That just that's heartbreaking in itself,
yeah,
because in adult life you're going to end up being on screen even more just for work. And so it's like having, I think it's like a health, it's a health issue almost, because riding
absolutely.
leads to good health and a positive self-esteem and all these kind of things that come from the endorphins that come from learning how to ride. And then that can translate, doesn't always, but I think a lot of times translate into someone who has interest in riding a motorcycle, and in
Yep,
power sports. So
for sure, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And the youth, not only is ridership declining, but the health issues are climbing as well. The obesity rate is at a record level, and all the diseases of, childhood diabetes, heart disease, everything
right.
associated with that sedentary lifestyle are at record levels in the United States right now.
And for
Mental health is
kids,
in the tank. Yeah.
like childhood obesity and diabetes is record level too. And
Yep.
it's like, wow,
Yep.
man. So
Yep.
how, before we wrap up here, like what are some good ways? What are some things that a dealer or somebody, one of our audience members and readers could do to get involved to help
Yep.
this get more kids on bikes and to help
You,
all kids bikes? What
you
what were
bet.
some
Yep.
good ways?
Yeah. Our website, allkidsbike.org, lots of resources there. But first, I think in the power sports world, we got to really be talking about getting kids engaged, and it starts with a bicycle. I mean, a bicycle is the first vehicle of a
Yeah.
human being. It starts
Yeah.
with a bicycle. We got to get them onto bicycles, and and just talking about it starts it. And then the next real step towards action along those lines is getting the programs into the schools. So, All Kids Bike, we're in 1,600 schools. We started 6 years ago. We have programs running now in all 50 states. We've got 1,600 programs running currently. We're
That's
teaching about
incredible.
160,000 kids per year how to ride. So I haven't stopped the bleeding yet, but I am very close. Within two
And you
years, I
can't
will
think
have
that it's
completely
over
turned the
with,
250,000 number around. So,
right? I think
yeah.
people think, oh, you're doing it all. I don't have to do it. I mean, can people
No,
look in their
there's
towns and be like where
so
they live and be like,
ab-
okay, what's the program here? Is there anything?
absolutely. There are around 50,000 elementary schools in the United States, and there are about 4 million kids in kindergarten. New
Wow.
kids every year,
Every year.
new kids every year in kindergarten. Like that's the scale of what we should be targeting. We want to teach 4 million kids every year how to ride in kindergarten. Like that's 100% mission accomplished. So there's
Could a
lots of
dealer say
opportunity ahead of us.
sponsor some Strider bike program to, or, to help get some of these bikes in the schools and to
You
help set up a teacher or,
You
um,
bet. So I'll give you the quick rundown on what the program is. The program going into a school costs $9,000. That trains the teacher, that provides the curriculum, that provides all the bikes, the helmets, the pedal kits, the kickstands, a bike for the teacher, storage racks, rolling storage racks that all the bikes and equipment hang on so they can go into a storage room and back out, everything they need. And that's a one-time cost, and that program will last 10 years in that
oh,
school with no additional funding.
so
So for
that's less than a
9,000
thousand a year.
bucks,
Yeah.
you're gonna teach over 1,000 kids with every program placed. So we're talking less than $10 a kid, and you're
Yeah.
changing their life forever.
Yeah.
It's like one of the best investments we could be making, um, for the health of the kids, for our industries of bike and moto to thrive. Just all
Absolutely.
around great investment. Um, but we're getting support across the board. I mean, we've got charitable foundations that are helping. We've got dentists and local supermarkets and bankers. We've got bicycle shops, motorcycle shops that have just stepped up to fund the school in their neighborhood or their community. We've got motorcycle dealerships that'll do fundraisers and poker runs and stuff like that to raise money. They'll round up the registers. It really doesn't take that much effort to raise $9,000 to fund a school to completely change the life of every child that'll go through that school for the next decade. It's so easy to
And
do,
it's a
but it's such a
memorable
big
thing
impact.
that those kids, it'll make such an impact that they'll all be
Yep.
like, hey, I learned how to ride in school.
Yep.
And they may not remember who did it, but they're gonna always remember that's what happened and that's
Absolutely.
when they learned. So
Absolutely. And you think about I'm thinking about, you got a motorcycle dealership in a town, and you put one of these programs in, and then you go to kindergarten graduation and you participate with a little certificate for every little kindergarten kid that's going to go home and be hung on the refrigerator, and it says
yeah,
congratulations on knowing how to ride from so and so power sports.
yeah, yeah,
And
that's
it's like,
cool.
geez,
Yeah,
this is like easy advertising budget money, and you're changing
yeah,
lives, and you're reaching out and prospecting to people who've maybe never even been into your dealership, and you're making an invite to them to feel welcome and to come in, even if they start by just buying some t-shirts or something, who
right.
knows? But there's 90% of America doesn't go into power sports dealerships or bicycle shops. Like the majority of
True.
America just doesn't go there. But when
They don't
when
go
we reach
anywhere
out,
much anymore.
yeah, when we reach out through the schools, though, it's like you connect with everybody. The schools like the coming together point of most
Yeah.
communities.
as we
Yep.
call them here now, because in order to get the funding, they're not either community learning centers, because they have to be used for a lot of different things, and that allows them to get a little more
Yep.
funding that way. But it is true. It's a community learning center, and I think that you know, kids and adults can come together in those spaces and you know do good things. So, and
Yep.
which one of them for sure is learning how to ride a bike. So we hopefully we can help push this message along and encourage dealers and other people to get involved and to help make a difference. But well, thank you so much for coming on and for all your insight into this. It's really interesting and really important, I think, for for our industry. Selfishly, it's important for our industry, but on top of that, it makes a big difference in a kid's life to be able to learn how to ride. Whether they
Absolutely.
become a customer or not. That's a important milestone. So, that be able to help
Absolutely.
with that, I think, is a feel good thing. So,
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for all that you've done for all these young kids, and hopefully, we can help tick that, ridership number up and keep on going. But thanks for coming on, and we'll have to connect more in a little while and see how things see the progress. I know it's been a
Sounds
few
great.
years, so yeah.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me
All
on.
right. Thank you. If you like this podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We also invite you to connect with us on powersportsbusiness.com.